Welcome to the Draft Deeper podcast. This is your host, Nathan Grubel. Joining me, as always, is my producer, Kevin Black, my co-host, Cole Miller, and a wonderful guest that we have on this week. I was blessed to be able to go on his show and spout about some guard prospects for a few hours. We did one heck of a show that night. It's a pleasure to have on Chuck from the Chucking Darts NBA Draft Podcast. Chuck, how you doing this evening?
I'm doing very well, Nate. The honor and the pleasure is all mine. And if anyone is interested in going back and listening to that episode, I think you came out and said that you thought Baylor had a shot to win the national title, and that you believed it. Really thought they had a chance. And look at us now. So very happy to pay back the favor and come on Draft Deeper.
Jared Butler's my guy. He's going to be my guy. And I still can't believe that he isn't rising up draft boards a little quicker than at least where I would take him. But it is what it is. Who knows? Maybe when people go back into that film a little bit, they'll come to a different conclusion and be more on our level. I think as a collective, we're pretty in the Jared Butler camp. But yeah, that Baylor Gonzaga game, people have asked me about it, to be honest. And I tell them I wasn't shocked by it. Obviously, I'm surprised to an extent that Gonzaga lost that game, Chuck. And you and I didn't really get to talk about that off the air. I don't know if you have any other opinions to throw in there about the championship. I wasn't shocked that Baylor pulled it out just because of how good they were as a team all year long. But obviously, there's a little bit of surprise when you think about how they dismantled the offensive machine that Gonzaga was.
Yeah, man. I mean, it was just very impressive. I don't think that I have anything really insightful to add compared to anyone who watched that game. There's the better team from the tip, and everything that makes Jared Butler and Davion Mitchell really good, scaled up in that game in a major, major way. So yeah, it was a wonderful performance by them for sure.
Cole, do you have anything you would want to throw in before we hop into the guys we're going to talk about this week? I know you weren't on with me last week when I talked to Rich about a lot of the fallout.
Yeah, I'll just say that it seemed like Baylor throughout the tournament seemed to catch that same mojo they had early in the season before their layoff with the COVID. And then Jared Butler and Davion Mitchell are two very high-level guards. And when you get to the tournament play, we all have seen in the past what what any high-level guard can do for a tournament team. So they took over and they did not let up. So yeah, hats off to Baylor.
Absolutely. So what we're going to do this week is we're going to talk about some guys who obviously I'm sure there's some draft boards out there that might have one, or who knows, maybe there's even a board out there that has all four of these guys as like first round type talents. But I think that at least the three of us here, we'd agree that we'd probably rate these guys out to be second round talents, at least the guys we're going to talk about first. Depending on how much time we have, we might get into some more top names that I would just have some questions for Chuck about, some of the things that we've been talking about on social media recently. But we want to start with four second round type grade guys, and I want to start with Isaiah Livers, the senior forward out of Michigan. Now, he didn't get to play a full year this year because of a foot injury. He missed their tournament run. The Michigan team actually played, I'd say, fairly well without him. But if they would have had him, he probably would have been that difference maker to help Michigan get to a Final Four, because he is that impactful of a shooter. He was obviously a deadly marksman from three, shooting 43% from three on the season with about 5 3-point attempts per game. And he's one of those guys that you're not really going to ask him to do much off the bounce or really be that threatening of a scorer inside the arc. But he's an experienced player. He's somebody who can certainly cut and move without the basketball if he has to, if a system calls for it. Some of those metrics he actually rated out pretty well in as far as synergy is concerned, especially this year when he was healthy. So one of the popular opinions that I've seen on draft Twitter, and this throws me back a little bit. And Chuck, I'm going to want to get your opinion on this since you're a guest. I'm going to go to you first. I've seen some pushback where people were talking about, why take someone like Corey Kispert, a player who, despite me having some different opinions about his level that he's on, still plays a similar game in some respects, and kind of gives you some of the same things that Livers would be from a more limited role on offense. why take somebody like Corey Kispert in the lottery when you can get somebody like an Isaiah Livers in the second round? And I've seen you chime in on that opinion here and there on draft Twitter, but that seems to be much more of a common question that people are asking. And I want to get your take on why that might be, and where are you on that side of the debate? Do you kind of still have Kispert among like a lottery level type grade, or would you maybe side with the notion that why would I waste that kind of a pick when I could potentially circle back around and get somebody like Livers in the second round?
Yeah, man, it's a good question. I I tend towards the latter. I tend to think that Kispert, and not to make this about Kispert, but his theory like is not a very complicated theory of the way he's going to provide value. In fact, I think one of the reasons he's gotten the bump that he has is that in a year where there are so many wing prospects, he at least is certain about what the value is that he's going to provide. He's not really a ball of clay. He's a finished sculpture, so to speak. And to me, I think that Kispert great at shooting deep, shooting off movement, really any kind of 3-point creative 3-point look that you can get. Kispert's going to be able to provide, but I can't get there and put him in the lottery when people talk about how he has this all court game and he shot so well from two this year. I just don't see, the movement skills and the ball skills really inside the arc to make him anything more than a very good 3-point specialist. And I think that he's a better prospect than Isaiah Livers because I think he moves around the court a bit better than Livers does, and his release is a little quicker. Like he's really polished his skill set to where he's going to be able to contribute right away. But if you were to tell me that Livers was going to be available at pick, 45, pick 50, which very well may be the case in this draft, depending on how it falls, I would rather take a shot on him back in that realm than I would Kispert. I mean, Livers in his career at Michigan, I've got him at 41% from three on 340 attempts. He's 6'7", just like Corey Kispert is. He's very, thick. He's listed at 230 pounds, and he did play, default, a healthy amount of 4 for them, depending on their lineup construction. And he doesn't look to me to be a better shooter than Kispert, which means that he probably won't be as good a player as Kispert because they're both going to be specialists. But I do think that teams are probably better served taking a chance on a more all-around wing player in the lotto, or just an all-around player in general than Kispert, and then still getting the very good value that a 6'7" marksman like Livers can provide late.
So I'll chime in with a few thoughts, and then I'll toss it over to Cole for some of his opinions. But first of all, the injury concerns with Livers don't necessarily back up his case and would actually lead me to potentially steer away from him a little bit, even in like that early second round. Like I'm confident that somebody's going to take him there because he's been that efficient at the very least shooting from deep for Michigan. But that gives me a little cause to pause. And then the other thing is that when we talk about scoring inside the arc and some of the things he's able to do off the dribble, some of the step backs he's able to go to, his potential finishing package around the basket, to me, I've seen examples of it on film. And if and when I do write about Isaiah Livers this year, I'm sure that I'll pull some of those clips as examples in a profile piece. But in terms of a consistency in doing those things, I think that's more of an idea than a proven commodity. Whereas the argument against Kispert, one of the main arguments is that he can't do a lot of stuff off the dribble or he's not an isolation shot creator himself, and that's true. At the same time, how much of that are you really going to ask him to do? And the things that he can do, he is very functional at doing, and the percentages on a larger sample size inside the arc don't bear out really well. And Cole, I think you might want to chime in a little bit about some of his synergy stats that you were able to pull in terms of what he does specifically driving to the basket. That might also argue against him a little bit. Not that we're condemning him as this player that shouldn't be drafted at all. No, no, no. By any means, we're not doing that. But I'm saying that this idea that like he's so much of a value in the second round as this shooting specialist to where you shouldn't look at somebody like a Kispert potentially in the lottery, even like in the mid first round, that you should take like a home run swing and completely pass on him for something that you think you might have in livers but might not ultimately bear out. I think that's more where we're going with this conversation. And Cole, what are your thoughts about that?
Yeah, so to touch on those numbers, I mean, Synergy has him as a poor and below average driver going right and left. And then also as a pick and roll ball handler, when he's hunting his own offense, he rates out in the 27th percentile. So I can't really see him translating to anything more than a shooting specialist at the next level. And then he's not really a stellar defender. So you really are just getting, in my opinion, the shooting. That said, he's a very good shooter and he's 6'7", so that is valuable, absolutely. But the injury stuff is a definitely concern. And Kispert, as well as his, as good as a shooter he has also been healthy the entire time in college.
Yep.
I think it's like something you need to bank on with him going forward. He's a pretty sturdy dude, and it's also a value to get that as well. So when Kispert is going to be such a weapon for an offense. I mean, like the creative offenses in the league, you run a ton of motion, and Kispert, like you said, Chuck, he moves a little bit better than Livers on the court. And I think that, that's going to keep happening throughout the league. And he's going to be a very sought after weapon at the next level.
And just to toss it back over to Chuck a little bit, I know that we didn't necessarily want to make this like a whole Corey Kispert conversation, but he's fresh in my mind because I just wrote about him. He was one of the profiles I put out this week. From that championship game, you see a lot of people dropping him on boards because of his performance, both in that championship game as well as kind of the tournament, other than like that first game as a whole. Did he necessarily drop on your board from the tournament run, or you kind of just stayed the course on him and you kind of have him where you do, and that's just going to be how it is?
I stayed the course mainly. And it was more that, I didn't think that he was. Maybe I'm mixing up Final Four games, but I thought like in some pressure moments, it was probably against UCLA, the game I'm thinking of. I thought he played pretty well and acquitted himself well. Like the thing with Kispert again is that I don't think there's a ton of mystery as to who he is. Like he's a good cutter. He's a very good shooter. He's an intelligent player. He's a quick ball mover, if not like a great, manipulative passer. And he's going to be like a quick strike offensive weapon, like Cole said. It's more where we might differ about his personal placement is just what kind of value proposition that is for teams drafting in a certain slot.
Yep.
But I don't judge anyone for having Kispert in the teens or anything like that. And like all of that stuff is stuff that I would project, hopefully, that Livers could do. I'm not saying I am projecting it, but that would be the hope for any team drafting him, is that he can get to some of the things that Kispert can do, which is why we're unified that Kispert's the better prospect. But with Livers specifically, I do wonder if he could lose some weight, like really, tone up his body so that instead of being listed at 6'7", 230, he's 6'7", 220 or something like that. If some of his movement skills, could improve, because he does. I've seen him get a couple chase down blocks. He has decent athleticism. He at least battles on the boards, and in the Big Ten, that's always a very physical proposition. And so I wanted to know, like, Nate, do you think that is something that could be unlocked with Livers, or do you think that the book on him is basically as certain as it is with Kispert, just to a less successful level?
Well, two things. One, I'm glad you brought that up because when you just look at him, he does look a little doughy to me. And I think when you get into an NBA training program and a regimen, some of that weight I think is going to fall off. And how much that adds to like some of his speed and his movement, that's to be determined. But I definitely think it could help him. Like we could all point out like 5 to 10 guys in the NBA where if they lost like not even anything like major, like 25 pounds, but they just lost like 10 pounds and they shed off a little bit more of that baby fat, like what would they be in terms of an athletic package? I think all of them could make enough of an improvement to where it might unlock something a little bit different about their movement game. And I agree with that for Livers. And the other thing I'll say about him is that it is a shame that he got hurt when he did, because I think if he had had a healthy tournament run and he had helped that Michigan team do better than they did, man, I think he would have solidified himself as a first rounder if he could have shown maybe no, like he wasn't going to change his shooting percentages on the year really as a whole, but if he could have just given like NBA general managers or NBA executives more glimpses at some of those isolation type moves that he did show some examples of at Michigan on a bigger stage, I think that definitely would have bode better for his case. And I think he could have solidified himself as like a back end first round guy versus maybe being like an early to mid second, somewhere in like that 30 to 45 range because of some of those injury concerns and some of the deficiencies that we've laid out. What do you think about that point, Cole?
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think he will like at the next level. Just thinking about it as you guys talk, we love reverse projection over here at Draft Deeper. We think it will happen with Harper. We think it'll happen with a couple other guys. And reverse projection, just to spell it out for you guys, is what you were talking about, Chuck, where a guy's a little doughy, gets into the league, drops a few pounds, and that unlocks a little bit of a quicker step or some more explosiveness. Definitely think it could be the case for Isaiah Livers, and hopefully that helps him with his injuries there. But he's also hopefully he keeps like a bit of a thicker body though, because I think it'll help him find value off the ball at the next level. I think he could be a really good screen setter off the ball, and then you get him in open pockets where there's going to be defensive collapses at the next level. There always is, and he's a great candidate to catch a quick pass and turn and shoot and be very efficient in that manner. So I like him off the ball at the next level as well. I do think he'll find value there. No, it is a shame he got hurt when he did. He could have shown a couple more things and pushed his way to the back end first round, like you said, Nate.
That is a good point, and I think that while I pointed out in my Corey Kispert profile that's up on the website that I really liked, and I pulled one clip definitely as an example of a Corey Kispert pick and pop action. I do agree that that should be a way that Isaiah Livers is used at the next level, and I think he's just by default because of his size being a little bigger than Kispert. I think he is a better screen setter than Kispert. And I would definitely like to see that unlocked a little more in the NBA. Chuck, what do you think about that point specifically and how he's used? Like we're talking about some of his athletic deficiencies. And again, he's not a bad athlete, but he's not elite. Do you really want to see him just running around the court constantly off screens and off of all that movement like you would use Kispert in the same way, or maybe if you utilize a different part of his skill set that he could be as valuable or who knows, potentially even more valuable than Kispert if you just use him in a different way?
Um, yeah, I think the way that Kispert is used, you know, all these different little tricky, pick and pop, ghost screens, handoffs, relocation, deep three shooting. A lot of that is unlocked because of how well Kispert moves and how quickly his release, or how quick his release is, pardon me. And I look at Livers' release just on isolation as every bit as good as Kispert's when he's on. I mean, that he does not care about contests or closeouts, and when he is set and he lets it fly, it looks as good as any other shooter in the draft. But anyway, yes, like the short answer is yes. You could use him in screens and pick and pops to sort of like increase the diversity of his offensive value as opposed to him just being a catch and shoot guy. I think that for a shooting specialist, shooting specialist is going to very quickly, if it hasn't already in the NBA, morphed from catch and shoot shooting specialist to just all around shooting specialist, where guys like JJ Redick, who made their money shooting off movement and running around the court tirelessly, are going to become much more the norm than they are the exception. And so I think Livers is going to have to improve on that, regardless of how he's used offensively. I mean, even if he's used intelligently on screens, I don't see like a ton of players who don't have great movement skills who are buffered by the fact that they can set solid screens. I mean, if anything, it's the threat of a screen, just enough to get the defense to pay attention that opens up space for that kind of player. And you see guys like Steph Curry do it. And Steph Curry is a willing screener, but he doesn't set bone crunching screens. He just sort of makes sure that he sets enough of a screen to paralyze the defense before he relocates.
Yep.
And his movement skills are so good that everything, past that is money for him. And so I think that it's the movement skills specifically that Livers needs to work on in order to reach a really productive level. But I do think it would be on the table for him if he cuts that weight for him to potentially become a more valuable player than Kispert. It's just, it's a remote chance, but I think it's a chance.
Yeah, and that's the kind of stamina that you need to have to really star in that kind of a role. And I think we can all agree on that. And I think we arrived where we needed to, was that Livers he's going to have to get in better shape to be in constant motion, running around the court to free himself up for some of those looks like Kispert, if he's going to excel in a similar type of role. Like that's what makes Kispert so special, is he's like a guy like a JJ Redick or a Kyle Korver. Like he's always moving, he's always doing something, and you don't quite see that level of conditioning and that level of attentiveness from Livers all the time. Like it's one thing if like he has this high release and he can shoot the piss out of the ball and he can hit from the corners or from the wing, wherever, that's great. But if he doesn't move and you can just have somebody pay attention to him on defense and just keep a body on him, how useful is he, right? Like is he going to figure out how to move and get away from defenders in a way that Corey Kispert was able to for the majority of the year? Now, obviously, there's some exceptions for him too. Like he wasn't perfect against pressure defenses, and that's probably the biggest part of why he fell apart and wasn't as efficient, specifically in those last two games of the season in the Final Four. Although, to his credit, he, especially the championship game, he was doing some stuff off the dribble, finishing with the offhand off a floater. Like he was showing some of that stuff that he does have in his game, albeit limited, and it's not pretty, but he does have some of it. And you're definitely going to need to see some of that from Livers too. But yeah, if he can't figure out how to separate himself better and get on the move more on a consistent basis, then you're going to see some of those mixed results in the NBA. So I think we all arrived at the same point on that. Now, moving on to, I will say a triad, like a trio, because I think that we were talking off air a little bit. These three guys we want to go over: Aaron Henry, Herb Jones, and Terrence Shannon Jr. They're, in terms of impact, they're all kind of like a similar wing player, right? But they each do different things better than the other. And I'll kind of lay it out, and this is how I see it. And then Chuck, I'll go to you in terms of how you kind of see these guys branching out. But to me, Herb Jones is the best pure defensive player of the three. I think Aaron Henry is the best athlete of the three and would technically have the most to unlock offensively because of his athletic package and his body composition. And then Terrence Shannon, at least to me, I know Cole might have some disagreements. He might lean towards Henry, but Terrence Shannon to me is the best shooter and scorer of the three. And while nothing he necessarily does off the dribble is quote unquote pretty or refined, it's really janky, it's junky, but it works. And like when I was going back and I wrote out Kate Cunningham's profile this week for Oklahoma State, one of the games I went back and watched his was against Texas Tech when Terrence Shannon was really taking it to Oklahoma State, and he was hitting a whole bunch of shots off the dribble, and a lot of it looked cleaner at times than I had seen from him in the past. And he is so engaged. He is a tough guy. He wants to eat your heart out constantly, and he doesn't care. He will do whatever it takes to win a game. And to me, that's why I think out of these three guys, I think Terrence Shannon is my guy out of the three. Chuck, I don't know where you stand on these three guys. I will say that Henry has been disappointing to me a little bit throughout his career. I thought that we'd get a little bit more from him, particularly in like shooting consistency than we've seen. And Herb Jones probably has extra value to offer from a playmaking perspective, although he's not quite the playmaker I think that some people like to make him out to be. But at the same time, he could end up being the best unique perimeter defensive weapon of the three, and even an interesting shot blocking weapon from the weak side. So I know I'm throwing a lot at you, kind of giving you three guys to work with here and how you feel about them. But where are you, Chuck, on these three guys? How would you rank them specifically? And how do you kind of see some of their games playing out?
Yeah. The short version is that I agree that I like Terrence Shannon the best
I
out of
don't
the
want your
three.
short version, Chuck. We know you go in depth. I want your long version. Come on, man. Don't sell us short.
Okay. All right. All right. All right. So I like Terrence Shannon the best because I think I agree that he is the most talented shooter out of the three. And he's also the youngest out of the three. And
Yep.
anytime that intersection hits, it's notable. I think he turns 21 in July. So he played all this year at 20 years old, first NBA season at 21. Um, and I think that the main area of growth for him, going back to what we spoke about with Isaiah Livers, is he just has to put on some weight and get a little bit stronger. His willingness to drive and to embrace physicality is there. He just gets bumped off his spot, or he'll
Mhm.
get stripped just because he's not that strong yet. But explosive athlete, very good first step. Competitiveness is all there. And he was a guy I think a lot of people were watching this year to see if his 3-point shot would come along, because he was one of those guys who's like, free throw numbers were there, but he didn't shoot very well from three as a freshman. And the three started to come along for him. He did shoot better this year on it. But looking at his mechanics, I really like his shot. And I think it's definitely going to be there in the pros. I mean, I saw him hit some off of movement. He hit some off the dribble. He's got his, shooting pocket on the same side as where he releases the ball. So he, uses a hang cross to get into it a lot. But I just think it's going to be there for him. I don't see anything really to worry about. And I think as he gets stronger and he improves his core, that shot is going to become more diverse. I like his passing vision. Again, your point about his competitiveness is right on. He is very willing to try passes. Does not play, extremely tentatively. And, Aaron Henry is a good passer in his own right.
Yep.
But there's a lot of, and this may not be his fault, but there's a lot of times in that Michigan State offense, where they play through Rocket Watts and he just sort of hangs out in the corner for a few possessions. And it probably is just a factor of that offense, but I would hope that Aaron Henry, third year, best player on his team, best athlete on his team, that they would just feed him more usage than he had. And towards the end of the season, you saw a little bit of that. And he has a very interesting, all court game we can get into a little bit more here in a minute. But he seems to not have the same quick action that Terrence Shannon does. And that might sound a little vague, but Terrence he just moves more quickly. He's just a bit more explosive
He's a
all
more
around.
graceful athlete than Aaron Henry. Like Aaron Henry, I think has more to him, but he doesn't move as gracefully as Terrence Shannon does. That's how I would word it, at least.
Exactly. That's right. And I think that Terrence is a bit more of a quick decision maker as well. And a lot of times when Aaron Henry's made his uh, not quite heliocentric plays, but when the offense is revolving around him, he likes to go in the post. He's comfortable doing that, comfortable passing out of the post, and it's just not a skill that's going to be utilized very frequently on an NBA floor. And it's not that I dislike Aaron, but I see Terrence Shannon, and he really is an outside in playmaking, attacking player, comfortable shooting the three in different ways. And just looks to me to be a guy who's going to figure it out in the NBA, especially as he gets a little bit stronger. I can keep going, but I don't want to just completely ramble on the stuff you gave me.
No, we can go to Cole, and then we'll kind of maybe pick apart each guy just a little bit more. But Cole, what are your general thoughts on where we're at in this part of the conversation?
I'm with you both that Terrence is probably the number one guy out of these three. I like what you said on the there, Nate, about Henry that he has the most to unlock. That's kind of what I was getting about off air with you earlier. So, but I agree that Terrence is going to be, he is the best shooter and scorer right now. Um, I have some concerns about him, but I do see the improvement he made from freshman to sophomore year as a ball handler and scorer. So I think that's a big green flag for him in terms of, I think the arrow is pointing up. But I question, and I'll let you guys take over this. I question his defensive reads, and then also just in general, his offensive efficiency as a passer really drops when he's trying to make plays for others. So I think he's great at getting his own offense, but when it comes to maybe making that extra dish or reading when to make the pass, it's not so hot for him. What do you guys think about that?
Well, that actually kind of leads me to another question. I'll give my opinion on it, and then I'll kick that question over to Chuck. Is that how good are these prospects from Texas Tech? How much are they actually soaking up about the game, and how much better at reading the game are they actually getting by going there when they were playing under Chris Beard? Like, I'll give an example. I wasn't. It's not that I was high on Jemias Ramsey by any means, but I definitely thought that he was like a first round talent because of some of the raw skill that he displayed as a shooter, as a mover off the ball. Like, I thought that he was going to be able to make an impact offensively by now in the NBA, and he was drafted by the Sacramento Kings, and he just kind of like evaporated. Maybe that's more, and Chuck, maybe you have that opinion. Maybe that's just more on Jemias Ramsey, or maybe some of these questions we're asking about Shannon. Maybe it's more of a developmental thing and where these guys are coming from and coming out of versus just what's in their individual makeups. I don't know if you have a response to that about Shannon.
Well, I mean, as far as Jemias goes, I mean, he was 18 all of last year, and he's
Yeah.
19 all of this year in the NBA. I just think he just isn't. He's just not ready, and that's fine. And
Mhm.
it still might have been the right decision to go if he was going to get, if he knew he was going to get picked. Which I think he got picked in the top 40, if I'm not mistaken. So like, he had his reasons, but I don't think it's time to like write the book on his NBA
Yep.
career. I think he could have a lot of value. As far as Shannon goes, I comparing him to Jemias or Jared Culver, um, I'll be frank that I have not been doing this long enough to have what I feel like are really sophisticated opinions on where Culver or Jemias were as prospects. Maybe Jemias a bit more since I really started doing this last year. But when I see to what Cole was saying about his reads and both on defense and as a playmaker, I think that's right. It's more what makes me optimistic about him is that he moves very well. I think he's a good lateral mover on defense. He's not as good as Aaron Henry. I mean, Henry is the best defender out of the three of these guys, in my opinion. Even though we'll get to Herb, it's more just that I evaluate prospects from an offensive standpoint first and foremost, like consistently, because I think it's rare that you find a prospect coming into the league who's going to be a real defensive asset right away. Everyone is going to have stuff to learn, especially with whatever scheme their organization is implementing. It's really more, to me, if someone is going to be an outright disaster on defense and you're sure they're not going to be good on defense, like Nate, when we talked about Sharif Cooper, that I think is a very fair concern to have for him. But for Shannon, with his athleticism and his tools, as long as he's willing to work, and I don't know any indication that would suggest that he's not, I think that he will likely figure it out. Maybe not right away, but the offensive value is sufficient to make him the best out of those three, and to probably distinguish him, frankly, from Jemias and Jarrett Culver, because Culver always had the questions on his shot, and Jemias was much more of a catch and shoot, catch and shoot, catch and shoot player. And I think Shannon does have more in his bag when it comes to playmaking than he did.
We'll see if that question ultimately does get answered with Chris Beard going to Texas now. If guys start coming out of the Texas program when he's there and they're not coming into the league more polished in terms of understanding the game and making reads on both ends than when they got there under him, I don't know. We might have more of a large sample size. Who knows? But That's just kind of my 2 cents on some of it, and maybe why Cole's bringing up some of these questions, because they are valid questions. Yeah, we haven't talked about Herb at all. Out of these three guys, I kind of threw him into the tribe. We haven't really talked about him. Um, I'll throw it back to you, Chuck, because you just said that you don't think that Herb is a better defensive prospect than Aaron Henry. I'm curious as to your reasoning why, because when I watch Herb Jones, I think the way that he moves his feet, the way that he is consistently moving his hips, like, man, those hips can turn. He must be one hell of a dancer when he's not playing basketball, at least in my opinion, because of his hip work. It is phenomenal. And that's really what you're looking for. Maybe he's not like the combo forward defender that Aaron Henry can be. Like, Henry has the body to be able to play up defensively. Obviously, he has the athleticism and the speed to keep guys in front of him. But like, if he gets into a situation where he's backed down by somebody, yeah, I trust that he's going to be able to hold his own where maybe Herb Jones can't. But just in terms of what Herb is able to recognize off the ball, when he's able to move so quickly off the weak side to be able to help, the way that he can keep guys in front of him on the perimeter and hold them there because of his size, length, the way that he moves his body, as I outlined. Herb is a very unique defensive weapon. And shout out to one of Cole and I's old coworkers by the name of Jake Pavorsky. I remember when we were at EV Hoops, and one of the meetings that Jake walked into, we were all just kind of talking about a few guys that we weren't necessarily going to be talking about that night at the meeting. And this was during Herb's freshman season. But he said, guys, I don't know when, but Herb Jones is going to be really, really good. Like I said, I don't know when, but it's going to happen. We're going to be talking about this guy as a real prospect. And he won SEC Defensive Player of the Year this year. And he's certainly proven that, at the very least, on that end of the floor, while the shot hasn't quite come around, while he still has some question marks about some of his half court scoring skills, I think he could be a pretty unique defensive weapon in the NBA. I guess really, in terms of where you would draft him, it's just about how much do you value a weapon like him nowadays, someone that you're not really going to look at to give you much offense, but somebody who could be an interesting playmaker in transition, someone who isn't immune to running a few pick and roll sets here and there if given the opportunity. And then obviously when you get from a defensive standpoint, Chuck, where are you kind of at on Herb Jones, and where would you be comfortable drafting him?
I really like Herb, and I should clarify, he is a better defender than Aaron Henry is right now. It's mainly your point about Aaron's body, about what he could unlock, that I think he is a better defensive prospect, just because Herb, Herb's I think a year older than Aaron, and is still needs to, I think, put on weight in order to not be sort of a skinny defender. Now, what he does is incredible on that end, because in addition to every physical attribute that you mentioned about his hip flexibility and how he keeps guards on the perimeter, he is one of the toughest players in the draft.
Yep.
One of the very, very toughest competitors in the draft. Frequently played hurt at Alabama, got nicked up, played through it. Had a game, I think his junior year, where he hurt his shooting hand, hurt his wrist at the end of the game, and shot his free throws with his offhand, his right hand, and hit them both. Just a really just insane and I'm not insane, but just like a very hardworking, beloved guy in that program. I would take him. I think I would take him in the first half of the second round, because the theory to make Herb a rotation guy in the league is very simple, and it's just his jumper. If you feel as though the advancement in the jumper this year, which was night and day from what it was, since I think last year he shot 6% on it or something obscene, to now low 30s. If a team thinks that they can really turn him into a viable catch and shoot player, then he'll see the court, because of how switchable he is, and how hard he plays, and how selfless he is as well. And so it really comes down to that. And I think that his shot looks certainly improved. It's a long release. It's out in front of him. He doesn't look like he'll ever be sort of a movement shooter. But being 6'8" helps, and being willing to shoot helps, and what kind of a worker he is. Do y'all see anything in particular about his jumper that make you think that it's projectable enough for him to stay on the floor, or do you think that it's just more likely than not that it never comes up to a good enough level for him to be a rotation guy in the league?
I mean, I'll just say that, and then I'll kick it over to Cole. That yeah, he improved his percentage to 35% from three this year, but he only takes under two of them a game.
Right.
So I'm not quite sure if it's a fact that mechanically his shot is that off. I personally don't think that he's that far away from being like if we want to call average 3-point shooter in the NBA like a 34-35% mark. I don't think he's that far away from getting there and staying there in the league. I think it is honestly more of a repetition and more of like a comfort thing for him. Like I don't know how much he's really prioritized working on it and making it more of a consistent weapon in game. Like he's going to racket those attempts up from like just under two to maybe he's going to get up to like 4 or 5 and be a lot more comfortable taking that shot. Maybe that happens in the NBA. Maybe a coaching staff that he's able to work with privately instills that level of confidence in him to the point where it can be a better weapon for him. That's more or less what I think it's about. And Cole, I don't know if you have any other thoughts on that, but you also pulled a lot of interesting negative numbers for Herb today from Synergy. Like just to put it bluntly, before Cole reads anything off that he wants to, Synergy hates Herb Jones offensively, that's just putting it lightly. Like for example, like I talked about some of his pick and roll ability that like I wouldn't call him like this excellent playmaker out of pick and roll by any means. I've at least seen him do it. Like he's not immune to doing it, but like Synergy hates him in pick and roll scenarios and in a lot of transition scenarios as well in general. So like things that I highlighted that he might be good at, the numbers actually say, no, Nate, you're damn wrong. He's not good at these things. So why don't you enlighten us a little bit, Cole, about your thoughts and maybe some of the numbers you pulled?
Yeah, I'll read down the numbers and then, like you said, give you guys my thoughts here. So he's a measly 19th percentile in transition, which rates him out as below average. He's rated out as poor in pick and roll ball handler when hunting his own offense. And so, like, those are not great numbers for a senior who's had pretty good usage rates throughout his time at Alabama. And I don't really see those things coming around. I do think the shot will come around. I think it is a matter of repetition, like you're saying, Nate. And pretty much everybody who goes to the league gets better at shooting. It's just you have all day to work on it. You have professional coaching. You get film to watch all the time, and just you get to figure it out a little bit more than you would at college. That said, he is really going to be like I said, he's limited on offense. Otherwise, he's straight up 3-and-D guy. The defense is going to be special, I think, for whatever role he does carve out. You guys said it, the way he moves his hips and feet, and also at the same time, he keeps his hands up like all the time when he does that. So he's engulfing guys on the perimeter. He really makes it tough for guys to navigate anywhere into the paint. So that's really his calling card for me at the next level.
And we've been talking about bodies through this podcast. If you had to get me to place a bet on who's probably going to maintain and keep the best body out of the three, obviously I think we'd all point to Aaron Henry as a heavy favorite, but I would actually rate Terrence Shannon to be in a different class than Herb. Like Herb has the length over all three of them, but his body, like he is built really slender. And I don't see him being able to pack on much more muscle at all. Now, how that plays out in terms of the strength base that he's able to build, particularly in his lower body, like if he's going to be asked to play the 4 spot and deal with more of those matchups versus playing like a 2-3 combo and being able to guard more out on the perimeter, I think that his strength base definitely needs to come from his lower body first and foremost, and even necessarily in his upper body. But yeah, he's got the worst body build out of the three. And I think that's really, Chuck, some of what you were highlighting too, when you were talking about who you like the best out of these three guys, that body makeup definitely plays a factor into where these guys could ultimately end up down the road.
Yeah, and you can just sort of see, like, we all see how good a defender Herb is at the college level. But if he, like, say he gets a cup of coffee, it's the third week of the season, maybe some injuries allow him to get a chance, and he goes up and he tries to guard not even one of like the stars in the NBA. Let's say they're playing Philly and he's one-on-one with Tobias Harris. Tobias would back him down into the third row. Like, it's just the level of physicality that you need in order to hold up and provide real defensive value is substantial. And if that part of his game is not immediately good, then you're leaning on whatever offensive game he has, which to Cole's point is much further away. And that's why I think Herbert, he's got an uphill battle ahead of him. The reason that I feel as though I would still take him in the first half of the second round is that he is so switchable on defense that I feel like, he could pick up guards pretty well in the league, I think, with his movement
Yep.
skills. And it's just, if you have a creative enough lineup around him, not that you would, draft Herb with the idea of building things around him, but if you have a creative enough scheme, a creative enough coach, he could be a very valuable defender guarding down. I think what you would look like, you see that Herb's 6'8" and that he's such a good defender and he has all these good defensive numbers, and you would hope that he'd be able to guard up or guard fours and be like, oh, well, this is our guy that's going to guard Luka Doncic. I don't think that he's going to be that guy. But I do think there's a real path for him in the league. And the point y'all made about his pick and roll playmaking, I don't think he's going to be a great pick and roll operator. I think he's more of a, drive and kick, drive and kick, drive and kick guy.
Yep.
But one thing that shocked me about him is that he's not that good a finisher. And if there's one thing he does do is he can explode off of 1 foot towards the rim. He only shot, 53% at the rim. I was on another podcast talking about Herb, and we were trying to figure out, why it was that finishing just was not there. And the best I can make of it is that he just doesn't have a really polished finishing package. He doesn't have a great sense for playing angles off the glass. He doesn't really know when not to shoot and keep his dribble alive, or when to, kick it out every time. And it's just not something he's used to, which would suggest that maybe he could get better at it. Do y'all feel that way when you see him try to finish, or do you think that it's just never going to be there for him?
Well, he has the longest strides out of any of these three guys that we're talking about. So I think if you're asking me who could potentially improve going at the basket the most out of these three guys once they set foot in the NBA game, it's probably Herb, because of the spacing that he's likely going to have just playing in the NBA game versus in the college game where everything's packed in more tight. So I think there's absolutely room for him to improve naturally, but a lot of that, when you talk about finishing too, if it's not always related to it being a pure touch issue, that also comes back to strength base and where you're looking to finish, how you're looking to finish. If you're going into the defense, how well are you able to absorb contact? And obviously, he's a tough kid. We can all agree that he's a tough kid. I wouldn't put him quite as the competitor that Shannon is, but like he's up there, right? So it's not about him not willing to go into the defense and finish at the basket, but if he's honestly just not strong enough to do something once he gets there, or finish through contact enough, or bounce off of it well enough, then that's going to be an issue for him in the NBA. But if he's able to use some of those long strides and maybe a little bit more of that dribble craft that I think is there for him at his size, not like trying to completely up his handle by any means, but he it's not like he can't handle the ball at all. So I think that there is a little bit of room for natural improvement just off of those factors alone. What do you think, Cole?
Yeah, I would say that the number is where it is right now because it is strength related, as well as yes, he has long strides, but I don't think his footwork is very advanced. He's just kind of a long strider when he gets to the rim, and so he's not really varying things up as he looks to attack the basket. And so yes, the space will help him at the next level, but I think getting with a footwork coach would just help him worlds, both on the perimeter as a shooter and just driving to the basket. Being able to capitalize on the opportunities he might have at the next level with the increased space. He's going to need to do that, like you said, Chuck, because he's going to have to contribute offensively in some regard. He's not a first tier defender in the sense that he's going to be able to anchor a starting wing defending position. Like you said, he can't handle Tobias. He can't handle some of these bigger wings that can really back you down and score. So I think he's really going to have to try and blossom his offensive game as much as possible. If I may get granular here for a second, you guys kind of mentioned it about how hard he plays and he's willing to go through injuries and whatnot. Given the infrequency he's shot so far, and like just say he hurts his wrist again, like if he's not able to shoot at a high efficiency because this guy is always getting hurt, playing his ass off on defense, like is he going to play his way out of the league at some point?
I guess the question is he made of paper mache? I guess is the real question. Like, is that going to be a bug that holds him down? I don't know the answer to that question, honestly. You bring up an interesting point, Kolchuk. I don't know if you have any other thoughts on that. I don't have an answer for that question. Like that's obviously a real possibility. And one of the ways we kind of outlined that for Livers, why some people could be hesitant and they're right to not necessarily want to look at him towards the top of the second round. You can absolutely make the same kind of argument for Herb, because if we're talking about durability and like what they're made up of, while Livers has a different body and he's more doughy, and that's really could be a concern for some of his injuries, would be like a weight thing. If Herb's made of paper mache and he's not able to pack on a little more weight to help with that a little bit, and he's just gonna be going through some injuries that could potentially put him out of the league, like, yeah, that's a similar type of concern.
Yeah, and I actually come at it from the opposite perspective. I don't think, because clearly, yeah, if he gets hurt and he can't, be healthy enough to constantly work on his game in productive ways and have the right strength and get the right reps, then he won't make it. But it's more to me like, what are his theories of playing his way into the league? Because I don't think, let's say he's healthy at draft time, which we hope he stays healthy through draft time. I don't think any spot is guaranteed to him. And I don't think a spot is guaranteed, for that matter, to any of these other guys. I think that Livers probably has the most certain of a chance to make a rotation right out of the
Yep.
gate,
Yep.
because of that shooting. But I mean, they're second rounders, not because they're not talented. I think this might be, the most talented, or at least the deepest second round of any draft, at least that I remember ever seeing. It's just more that those spots are competitive, man. And there's going to be, Herb is very athletic. I actually think that he is more explosive athlete than Aaron Henry is. I know, Nate, that you said you thought that Aaron was the best all-around athlete, but for all of his athletic explosion and movement and toughness, there will be, 20, 30 6'8" guys who shoot better than him, ready and willing to take his rotation spot if he can't justify it. And so it's just going to be an uphill climb. It's an uphill climb for all of them, but especially so for Herb, since he's arguably the furthest away offensively.
Cole, we've all mentioned Aaron Henry as having the most promise out of these three guys, maybe even potentially all four, if you really want to throw Livers in there, because of the package that he has to work with just from a physical standpoint. But I think we could all agree that he's disappointed us at Michigan State, and he hasn't quite been this top shelf level prospect that I think he could have been. Like when I was first watching him in Michigan State, when he got there, he reminded me a lot of Miles Bridges, a guy who did go high in the draft and has certainly made an impact for Charlotte since he's been in the league. But I just think Aaron Henry hasn't done anything well enough consistently to keep himself up when we're talking about his draft stock. And I think, to me, it's not that there are a ton of things that he can't do. It's the fact that he doesn't do anything well enough on a consistent basis. So what are some of your thoughts on why he might have disappointed you, and what he can do to take advantage of some of that promise that we all think he has to prop himself back up in the draft conversation?
I mean, from a statistical point, I guess is kind of the most disappointment. He just didn't shoot the rock that well this year, coming in at 29.6% from three. It's pretty lackluster for a guy of his talent. But I think, something we don't know to the situation. Maybe the situation just wasn't great for him this year. He was not feeling Michigan State, but he was locked into the season and he played it out. We just don't know what goes wrong. There was a lot of heat on Izzo this year for a couple different things. I don't want to get too much into that, but who knows what went wrong there or what didn't go wrong there. So aside, I think Henry's a very intriguing prospect. He's kind of the guy I would say, get this kid in the G League and say, go get him, kid. Like, just take off all the cuffs and just see what he's about. Just get it. I think a change of scene might just be what he needs, honestly, and like a coaching staff that believes in him and believes in his talent. And if that happens at the G League level first, and then it happens at the pro level, great, because he's got a lot to him. And like you said, he's got an impressive physical package. He doesn't move quite like Shannon does, but his body control with his start and stop ability is pretty impressive at his size with the ball in his hand. So I like Henry a lot. I just think he needs some time to polish up and get out of the situation he was in this year.
I agree with that. I will say that, like, if you ask the common man to just look at these four guys and just say, who do you think is the NBA player out of the four? Who do you think looks like the NBA player out of the four? Aaron Henry's going to win that probably like 9 times out of 10, just because of his physical stature, the fact that he's built like a linebacker. He's listed at 6'6", 210. That's probably right. He might even be a little heavier than that. Who knows? Because he certainly looks like it, especially in his broad shoulder base. But Chuck, what would you like to see from Aaron Henry in terms of solidifying himself as a guy who could stick to a rotation in the league? You kind of agree with Cole on some points, or do you have some other thoughts of your own?
I agree. I agree with Cole a lot. I mean, the shooting is the thing with him. If he shot 37% this year, he'd be a first rounder. I mean, it just is what it is. And so, I mean, when I see his form, I don't think it looks terrible. I don't think it really projects to be a movement shot in the same way that I don't think Herb ever projects to be a movement shooter. He looks like he needs to be really square towards the hoop before he lets a shot go. I think he should be shooting better than 30% from the field. And you can see how much more comfortable he is in the mid-range when he can rise up and just sort of, one dribble jumpers in that, area of the court. He just looks more comfortable doing it. And he has pretty good touch around the hoop with either hand as well. But the other aspect of his game, and I know I talked about it with Herb as well, is that I feel like he should be getting to the rim more. I feel like he should be getting fouled more, and he should be leveraging his physical advantages more, especially now last year as an upperclassman at Michigan State. And it's not as though he's a bull in a china shop. He can be, like I said before, very patient in the post with the ball. I just wish I saw a bit more physically overpowering performances from him. And I didn't ever really quite see that. It seemed like he was content to hang out. He would get his touches when he got them, but there were periods of the game where he's just sort of standing in the corner. And unless he can catch a defender sleeping back door, then I don't want to say he would disappear. He would sort of really, you could see him being low usage for like a half. And I just wanted to see a bit more urgency from him. Because I think I may be a bit lower on Henry in terms of his all-court potential than you guys are. So, like, Nate, what do you see in him in terms of, I guess, overall offensive potential that makes you think that he has like this like future in him, this great starting wing kind of player in him?
Well, I mean, he can certainly rip something off the break or get a step on somebody in the half court and take off to the rim like a monster, right? Like he has that kind of potentially lightning quick first step that you look for in a guy his size at the wing spot. So he can definitely take somebody off the dribble and finish at the rim when he gets there. I think we're all in agreement that the swing skill is the shooting. And you pointed out his form, Chuck. I am by no means a shooting coach or a shooting specialist. I know a few things. If I were Aaron Henry, I'm looking at his shot. It seems like everything about him, he's completely squared up at the shoulders. His bend coming back is like it's this absolutely perfect 90-degree angle. What I wonder is if he just loosened up his stance a little bit. So if he spread his feet out just a little bit wider, maybe didn't look to have this perfect 90-degree bend using the left hand when he's following through on his shot. Maybe if he brought out his elbow just a little bit, like if he just like loosened up Kind of like when you talk about what his form looks a little better when he's shooting off the dribble, and it's probably more natural for him. Maybe that's what he worked on more when he was growing up, or something that he went to more versus being this like awesome standstill shooting weapon off the catch. Like maybe if he just loosened up and relaxed a little bit when he was shooting off the catch, maybe it's like a mental thing. Maybe he just thinks about it a little bit because everybody's probably talking about him like, why aren't you shooting better? Why aren't you shooting better? Your draft stock could be better if you shot the ball better. Maybe that's just what needs to happen. I don't know if you guys have any thoughts on that. Like I said, I'm not a shooting coach, but that's to me, it just looks like he's a little tight on his shot.
Yeah, I agree that he's tight, and I mean, I'll let Cole address it as well. But I think it's hard, man. I think if you're not a natural 3-point shooter, it is sort of one step at a time. So maybe it will get looser, but I see the same things that you see.
Yeah, I see them too. I think it could get looser. There's all sorts of different stretching practices and all kinds of different things you can do these days physically to try and loosen up different parts of your body. So I wouldn't count that out necessarily just yet, unless he gives it a try. It doesn't work, of course, but I kind of wanted to answer your question, Chuck, with another question. Like, when is the last time Michigan State has had a true wing player of Henry's type and really shown that they've helped develop that player at all? And like, how much do you hold that against Henry, and how much should that be held against him in terms of his ability to get out of that situation and perhaps just turn the page and develop where he wasn't really given that chance at Michigan State?
Yeah, it's a good point. I mean, would you say, I mean, Miles Bridges did go in the lottery. So do you feel as though he was much closer, like a much better developed, better all-around player, not just talking prospect and physical profile, than Henry was when he came out? Because I would say he probably was.
So Miles Bridges was definitely more of a complete prospect. The whole issue was it was tough trying to project him out of his freshman season. But when he announced that he was coming back to Michigan State for his sophomore year, a lot of people actually rose him up draft boards for that next draft. And they're like, okay, this guy coming back, if he shows a little bit more polish, he works on a few things, he could be like a top 5 pick. But he never rose. He only fell. Why is that? To Cole's point, he didn't get any better at anything in that second year in Michigan State. If anything, he was just more of what he was during his freshman season. And I think you can kind of make that same argument for Henry too. In the years that he's been there, I don't know if he's necessarily improved at much of anything. Maybe he's gotten more comfortable just playing the game of basketball. Maybe he's tightened up the handle a little bit. He can do a few different things off the dribble. He can make a few passes that he wasn't as comfortable making day one when he stepped on the court during his freshman year. But like other than like minor things like that, did he really improve something where you look at his game and you're like, oh, in his time in Michigan State, he made a major improvement to this? No, he hasn't. And that's probably why he's fallen. Now, I don't think anybody ever had him as like a lottery level type prospect. So I can't say that like he fell from the same level of grace that Miles Bridges did, but in a way that like Miles Bridges just like slightly fell, he didn't go up. I'd make that case for Aaron Henry. I think Aaron Henry at his best was always like a mid to late first rounder, like probably somewhere in like the 20s to 30s. And now you're kind of seeing him in like the beginning of the second round, like a 30 to 40 range. Like he didn't take a major fall, but he definitely dropped. He didn't improve his stock at all. And Cole's probably onto something that some of these guys go to Michigan State, they aren't necessarily developing any major skill or getting better in a significant way. They're kind of middling along, learning how to, adjust to the game of basketball a little better because Tom Izzo is one hell of a coach and he knows what to do with the players when he gets them to play to his strengths and win games for him. But how much is he really making them better for the NBA game? I think that's a great point that remains to be seen.
Yeah, I guess, and sorry, I wanted to know if Cole had an answer to his question. Like, do you hold that more against Michigan State?
I'm kind of just realizing that today and, the last day or so as I researched for this. Jared Jackson left as a freshman. And I'm wondering, like, do we see the stuff that he's pulling off from the perimeter if he stays at Michigan State? I don't know. I don't think Izzo gives these guys the creativity, and I don't want to harp on Izzo because he is such a fabulous college coach and he's done so much for the game. But at some point, like you are just trying to win college games first, getting these guys ready for the pro, and I don't know. I think there is something to be said for some of the lack of perimeter players that come out of Michigan State and their development program in that regard.
Cole and I aren't done talking about that level of topic. I'll give that spoiler for everyone listening to this show next week. We are going to be talking about the Kentucky guys, and there are going to be words to be said about, are these guys coming out of Kentucky becoming better pros while they're there, or is a lot of what they're able to show in the NBA off of work that they're doing with other coaches, other type of development staffs, because that's been a major thing for a lot of these Kentucky guys. And I think that Cole is absolutely inbounds. We're not questioning Tom Izzo as a coach by any means. None of us would ever do that, but there is a point to be made about some of these guys that are revered as these top level prospects. They're not necessarily getting better because they went to Michigan State. I know for a fact that when you watch some of the Jaren Jackson stuff, Cole, when he was coming out of Michigan State, he worked with some different guys when he was preparing for the draft, including Kevin Garnett, which that probably helped him a lot more during the pre-draft process than necessarily anything he might have picked up while he was at Michigan State. So yeah, it's absolutely a fair point to bring up, and something that's going to be talked about more and more. And you kind of heard some of that buzz, like I was talking about with the Kentucky guys, with somebody like Juzang not literally showing anything at Kentucky, and then all of a sudden he carried UCLA to a Final Four berth. Like, that doesn't just happen out of thin air for no reason. So it's an interesting topic nonetheless. So we actually hammered home a lot of different points about these four guys, and this was great conversation. How I want to close the podcast is not that we necessarily need to do deep dives on these two guys, but it's more of like, while I have Chuck, just some interesting things that I've seen him talk about on Twitter. By the way, if you aren't following this guy on Twitter, your handle's at Chucking Darts, correct, Chuck?
Yes.
Yeah, you need to follow this guy because he brings up some excellent points, and him and I have engaged in some discourse with some other people as well as ourselves, obviously. But Josh Giddey, interesting name, high
Yeah.
riser especially over the last few weeks. I saw you tweet something. I believe it was our good friend Nick's Draft on Twitter was making a point about the Knicks looking at Josh Giddey, and you made a tweet back. Why couldn't somebody like the Knicks potentially look at him in the top 5? Now, I thought that was a really interesting point because it seems like everybody has their draft boards locked in on like these same 5 guys. But
Yeah.
I think there's room for that argument to be made because of some of the things that we've been seeing from Giddy recently. So why don't you just enlighten us a little bit, Chuck, about why you made that at that point, and where you're at with somebody like him?
Okay. So I'll say that was partially tongue in cheek, just because I think that, like you said, we look at these guys and pick them apart and put them back together. But it seems like I always think that there's way too much consensus in board making. Like, did anyone have Emmanuel Quickly as a top 10 player in last year's draft? But he's been one of the 10 best rookies. And if we were to do some sort of, redraft gimmick right now, he would probably go around the top 10. So, like, things are never as settled as they may seem. And with Giddy, it's a pretty simple case, man. He runs a pro team in a pro league against grown men at 18. He is going to be one of the youngest players in the draft. He has size at 6'8", and he's a very accomplished playmaker. I think that some of the people who are listening to this probably already know, but PD Webb, who's at Above the Break 3, did a film breakdown of Josh Giddey's game on Twitch this week that went into more detail than I'm about to go into about his strengths and his weaknesses. But basically, the guy just sees the floor, and he can operate in the pick and roll and in the half court at a very high level when it comes to his vision and just making plays. And he's not that accomplished of a scorer yet. His shot is like the most obvious question about him, because I think he's shooting 67% from the line. He's shooting low 30s now from 3, and that's something that has come up. And he's a little bit of a string bean, though he's added some weight on, and that clearly is going to help his shot as he gets stronger and stronger. Not a textbook shooter, but it's coming along. And at the end of the day, if there's an 18-year-old who's 6'8", who playmakes the way that Giddy does, it's just don't overthink it. Mm-hmm. One of the stats last year that I found, I've said this before on Twitter and elsewhere, but LaMelo was not my number 1 player last year, but I did have him high. I did have him in my first tier. And stat that popped about him was that in the NBA in the last 20 years, there have been, this was before this season, there have been 3 players that were at least 6'7" who were 20 years old or younger, 4.5 assists and 20% usage. And 20% usage is not crazy. It just means that you're trying to score a little bit and you average 4.5 assists, which is a good number, but again, not crazy. And the only 3 players to meet those thresholds at 6'7" and younger than 20 were LeBron, Luka, and Ben Simmons. It's just not a brand of player that comes along very often. And LaMelo, through his own way, which is incredibly unique, and he's a much different prospect from each of those other 3 guys, found those thresholds and he provided a lot of value. I don't think that Giddy is maybe going to reach that usage rate. I think he's going to be much more of a rotational guard early in his career, but he might average 4 or 5 assists as a rookie. And at 6'8", if you can do that, man, it's just, it augurs well. As far as putting him 5 relative to some other guys in this draft, that goes more into, who am I not quite as high on? What am I saying about this solid top 5 that everyone seems to have agreed on? It's much more a comment that, like, you can only drop a guy like that so far, who is going to provide this offensive value. Giddy has his defensive questions as well, but like I said before, unless it looks like you're going to be an absolute sieve and completely worthless on that end, I give 18-year-olds particularly a break on defense, particularly ones who are playing in a pro league. Giddy plays 30 minutes a night in that league. And that Australian league is not the NBA, but it is physical. And they set hard screens in that league. So just the fact that he can bear the load that he can, I think is very encouraging about him. And so it's the sort of thing where if Josh Giddey were the number 6th ranked prospect going into the season, I don't think his stock would have moved an inch. I think it arguably would have gone up. But because he was whatever he was, a fringe first rounder going into the season, people are a little bit more reluctant to give him really the boost. That's all it was. It was just trying to reframe how we think of some of these guys and their skill sets. But what do y'all see when you think about Giddy?
You can call it a reframe all you want, but like when you made that point, like I didn't think you were crazy by any means. Like I kind of just like sat there and I was like, oh, like you know what? Chuck, whether he means this or not, like Chuck has a damn point. Like I think a huge misconception behind Giddy, not necessarily anything related to what PD Webb did on Twitch, which by the way, I'm glad you plugged that because I was going to plug that. If anybody hasn't had the chance to see that, he has the clip saved on his Twitch account. I think it's just PD_Webb or something like that. If you follow him at Above the Break 3 on Twitter, you'll definitely find it. But yeah, not necessarily to that, but when you look at Giddy, like you're just looking at him. Like when I talked about those 4 guys previously that we mentioned, and I said that Aaron Henry, like if you had to make a bet in terms of like what they looked like, you're going to bet that Aaron Henry looked like the NBA player the most out of the 4 of them. If you look at Giddy, you're not necessarily having that same thought, right? And I think like when people are going back and like watching tape and looking at this like 6'8", 6'9", long, lanky white guy who's not necessarily like built or like muscular by any means, he's just tall. Like you just look at him and that doesn't scream out like NBA star, right? Like I think he's definitely a victim to that point to an extent. But when you actually dig into the film and you watch him and you look at what he's good at his size, you don't find Josh Giddey's just growing on trees every day. And I think that's the main point that everyone's been trying to illustrate about him is that while he might not end up bearing out as like a lottery guy or like a top 10 or a top 5 guy in this draft, I think you have to go into his evaluation with more of an open mind than you might have previously and kind of get past some of those misconceptions that we might just naturally have when we're looking at some of these prospects and trying to evaluate them and say who looks like a star, who can be a star in the NBA if you're talking about drafting him that high. I think you need to look past some of that and just dig into the film and look at what he's doing. Because to your point, Chuck, he is tearing it up in the NBL right now. And if Cole doesn't mind, I want to read you some stats, Chuck. All credit goes to Cole for pulling these numbers. He was the stats guy this week. I by no means, I didn't do this homework, but I want to just read you some numbers. So we actually did a podcast our last podcast when we talked about him on March 18th. So we're pretty much like a month out from that podcast when we last talked about him. His 4 games since, he's 12 points a game, but 9 assists per game, 9 rebounds a game, 45% from the floor, 40% from 3, and 83% from the free throw line. Now, he's not taking a bunch of free throws per game, but he's still hitting them at a higher percentage than when he was previously at the beginning of the season, like you alluded to. And he's still contributing all over the floor defensively, steals blocks when he can, and he's trying to limit his turnovers. So you look at an entire package like that. Yeah, there's not a lot of prospects that can put up that kind of a stat line over a 4-game span, a 5-game span, a 20-game span, whatever it is. He's doing something that's unique in a man's league. And that needs to be talked about more and looked at more. And I can't wait to do much more of a deep dive on Josh Giddey as I'm going through writing some of these profiles, because I think there is a real argument there to be made that he's this top 10 level guy just hiding in plain sight. And we're not talking about him because he doesn't look like your traditional NBA star and he wasn't playing at a traditional college powerhouse. And I don't know what you want to contribute to that conversation, Cole, but that's really where I'm at on Giddey right now.
Not much else to add there. He's got so much you can't teach just from the on-court skill and then also his size with all that skill in place. It's ridiculous. He is definitely top 10. Like I made the comment to you a couple weeks ago, Nate, through text. I was kind of joking, but like there's a lot of chatter around Davion Mitchell and Butler, and rightfully so, and a couple of the other guards in the tournament. But I jokingly said, but Josh Giddey, like let's be honest, is the guy. He's 6'8", and he does all this other stuff. And he's, like you guys have said a couple times now, he's playing in a man's league, and he's gotten better every week. That can't be sneezed at. So, yeah, Josh Giddey is definitely a very intriguing prospect, and I think he's solidified himself as the top international guy this year.
And the other thing about him too, he's got that Aussie swag to him. Like that man does not give a shit. He's going to talk trash. He's going to get up in your grill, and he's not afraid to make something a street fight. You hear that from him. Any kind of interviews you hear when he's talking about his passion for the game and how he sees himself as a player. I love that. If you got that, you're good in my book, my friend. I don't know if you have anything else to add as we wrap up Giddy, Chuck. But yeah, Cole and I, we saw that and we're like, you know what? Chuck makes a lot of sense. And anybody else who has said something in that realm, like, yeah, you got to pay more attention to this guy.
Yeah, and just so I'm not completely hedging, I did release a board on Twitter, if anyone wants to look it up, a couple weeks ago, where I did have Giddy 5th. Now, maybe I end with him 7th or whatever, but like I do believe that he is every bit in that conversation as much as Kuminga or Scotty Barnes or anyone else who is more traditionally getting that publicity. Can I throw a stat real quick about Aaron Henry and Herb Jones?
Please.
Before we wrap. Okay, so this is admittedly one of the things I like doing with these prospects. I like to get on bartorvik.com, which is a database tracking all college players that tracks a lot of stats, not to the granularity of Synergy, but it tracks lots of stats on college guys going back to 2008. One thing that Aaron Henry and Herb Jones have in common is that they, created events on defense. They good blocks, good steals guys, and both of them were wing players, perimeter guys, which really it's hard to be a good shot blocker, especially in college at that position, because typically you're funneling into a big man who's sitting at the rim in college, and they are the guys, gathering up those blocks. Since 2008, there have been 4 players in the country who went to high major schools to post a block percentage of at least 4%, a steal percentage of at least 2%, who were between 6'5" and 6'8", wing size guys like these two are. Who had an assist percentage over 20. Both these guys did. Now, they do it in different ways. There's noise in that stat, I understand. But guys who play make offensively and defensively like that, and who had at least 5 dunks, which is another sort of quick and dirty way to be like, are you an athlete, or are you just sort of getting by these numbers some other way? So once again, 20% assist percentage, 4 percentage block percentage, 2 steal percentage, wing-sized guys, at least 5 dunks. and it was Aaron Henry and Herb Jones this year, and then Draymond Green and Derek White. That's an
Mm.
all college players since 2008. So I think that we did a good job in dissecting these guys' games and talking about, the challenges they face and why maybe they aren't, surefire players. But they're in the second round. We know they're not surefire NBA players. So I think it's important to recognize the rarity of some of their talents. Because I came across that and I was like, wow, that is an impressive list. And it
I
doesn't
love
mean they're going to succeed, but it does mean that they are in good company. And so I wanted
that.
to close with that if we could.
Yeah, I
I
don't
love
think there's a better way to end the podcast than on that. I mean, for our audience, I promise we will talk about this guy at some point. We were going to potentially bring up Keon Johnson because Chuck and I have gone back and forth in terms of our opinions on him. We might have had some questions for each other about him. He deserves a conversation that's probably longer than like 5 minutes. We've spent a lot of time on some of these other guys, and for good reason. These are guys who are going to be drafted, and their games should be valued in the eyes of the NBA beholders in terms of the scouts and the executives running these teams in the front office. So, Chuck, you were awesome, man. Seriously, you're one of the best people who's on draft Twitter right now, trying to make something of themselves and get information out there on some of these prospects, just like we are. Where can my audience find you and your work?
It's the Chucking Darts NBA podcast. It's available wherever you find podcasts, but I link episodes on my Twitter at Chucking Darts. The Draft Deeper Twitter account is nice enough to retweet some of my episodes, and I am obviously happy to do the same. So if y'all follow Draft Deeper, and I presume that you do, then you'll see me pop up every now and again. But thank y'all so much. This was such a pleasure.
Yeah, absolutely, Chucky. Like I said, it was awesome to have you on. And thank you, everyone out there, for listening to this episode of the Draft Deeper podcast. If you don't follow us already, it's easy at Draft Deeper on Twitter. Like our Facebook page. You can find it just by searching the name. Subscribe to our YouTube channel, as well as subscribe wherever you would rather get your podcast, be that Apple Podcasts or Spotify. And go to the website, draftdeeper.com. I was hyping up this website for a while. We had put some test profiles out to see kind of what they looked like, how they would do in terms of Jalen Johnson and Jared Butler. Starting this week, I've been cranking out profiles nonstop. We went through Cade Cunningham and then some of the Gonzaga guys this week. Those profiles are going to keep rolling Monday through Friday from now up through, I think, like the draft lottery and like the back end of that week with a draft lottery at the end of June. So definitely keep an eye on the website. Give us any feedback you might have on those profiles. I'm proud of them. I think they're awesome. Cole's working on a project as well that he's going to have up on the website, a written project that we're going to be proud of and something that we'll definitely dive into in multiple podcasts. And that's a lot of content between what we're doing here and what we're putting on the website. That's a lot of content to carry us up to the draft lottery. And once that lottery order and the draft order set, then we get into good old mock draft season, and I'm sure that Chuck is going to be stopping by again to give us some thoughts on some GM style mock drafting that we might be doing. And I'm sure that we who knows, we may find ourselves on the Chucking Darts NBA podcast sometime again in the near future too. So don't go anywhere. There's plenty of content coming. Again, thank you all for tuning in. Have a wonderful rest of your week.